strain and multitasking, and it's just become a natural part of how we do things. And I don't think that people really realize that as we use energy in these different parts of our brain over the course of the day, it really wears out our mental energy. So it makes sense that we're making poor choices at the end of the day, or we're getting in stupid arguments at the end of the day, because we're really wearing out that mental energy with the strain on our brain. The second thing is stress. And we know that stress is actually a good thing. Stress is a stimulus for growth, so we don't want to eliminate stress. But when stress overwhelms our system, it becomes toxic. And in fact, very interesting that cortisol in particular, the stress hormone cortisol, is actually toxic to the brain and can kill brain cells. And so most people just have an underlying chronic stress that keeps their cortisol levels raised to the point where it can be harmful to their health. And in fact, medical experts estimate that 75 to 90% of doctor visits are actually stress related. So we're starting to see the impact of stress and multitasking, and unfortunately, I think it's going to be playing more and more of a role in our cognitive decline and potentially even speeding up the development of Alzheimer's disease as we age. And that's the third problem, is aging. So we can't do anything about that, but we are aging, and our aging population, the baby boomers, are starting to turn 65. For those of you that know a little bit about Alzheimer's disease, you know that after the age of 65, the risk of developing the disease doubles every 5 years, and by the time you're 85, it's actually a 50-50 chance. So we're getting older, we're able to live longer, which is great, but how are we using those advanced years? And that's really the question that I have, is with several family members having Alzheimer's disease, are there things we can do now that will help prevent or at least prolong the development of Alzheimer's disease? And I went to a neuroscience training at the University of Pennsylvania, and I was really stunned by this last statistic here. They said that if we just delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease by 5 years, so just giving people 5 more healthy years, would save our country $500 billion in the year 2050. And that's based on the projections and the numbers that people are expecting to see with this disease. So there's all of these factors going on. People are overwhelmed, multitasking, stress levels are high, we're aging on top of that, and all of that leads to a decrease in our mental energy now, but also as we age. So those are the 3 key issues that I try to tackle in my book and in my presentations. So what? So what do we do with that? Knowing that there are these challenges, the first thing to look at is why does it matter? And I mentioned, it slows us down, it makes us age quicker. What are the effects of less than optimal brain functioning that we experience? And you can think about for yourself what those might be. What do we do? There's so much information out there about how to live a healthy life. How do we know what works, what doesn't? And it can be so confusing to sort through all the data. So I go through very quickly what I believe are the most important things we can do. Of course, there's laundry lists of things we could do, but what are the things that are going to give us the most return on our investment from a time and energy standpoint? And then last of all, and this is where I get really excited, is how do we actually do that? The neat thing about how the brain works is that we can train our brain to help support these healthy lifestyles. So while we're trying to live healthier, we're also training our brain to help us to live healthier, which is also supporting our brain. So it's this nice cycle that we find ourselves in. And so I think it's important to understand, how do we train our brain to do that, to support us? Okay, so I want to show you a video, and unfortunately I was not able to upload it, but I'm going to go ahead here using our web tool, and I'm going to show you this on YouTube. Okay, so let me just pause this here. So what this is just an illustration of brain cells communicating, and I think job of showing us some of the key features here. So if you see this all the way through, you see the chemical message being sent from one brain cell to the other. Let me go ahead, I'm going to take this back here. Okay, so what you see here are these branches reaching out towards each other. And just to keep things super simple, I like to tell people there's really 3 things that we want to focus on with our brain training with regards to the structure of the brain. The first thing is making sure that the connections are strong. So those actual branches that you see reaching out, that each one of those individually is strong. And we can strengthen those through brain training and also different healthy lifestyles like the foods that we eat, the exercise that we get. We can also increase the number of connections, and this is something fairly new that's very, very exciting. Aerobic exercise in particular stimulates a chemical called BDNF, which actually causes neurogenesis, or the creation of new brain cells. So we can create new cells, we can create new connections, and the more of those connections we have, obviously the better off we are in getting a message from one to the other. And this, I think, is really important in thinking about Alzheimer's disease, because if something were to happen and there was an issue, a plaque or tangle or something, we have more connections, we might be able to manage it so that we could go around those problems. And one of my favorite studies, a nun study that was done, they actually found some people who had plaques and tangles when they looked at the brain upon autopsy and never showed any symptoms. So they carried the disease, they had the issues structurally, but their lifestyle supported their brain functioning in a way that may have kept them from showing symptoms. This is very exciting if genetically you have a predisposition for getting Alzheimer's, to know that maybe the things that you're doing now will help support you to live healthier for a longer period of time. So the third factor here is the expression of the message between the two, so the chemical messengers, and making sure that those chemicals are positive, supportive, strengthening chemicals, and not the kind that are going to pull those connections apart. Stress, cortisol, actually causes those connections to separate more, as opposed to things like dopamine and the reward center, which can be good and can be bad, because we can also be rewarding ourselves for bad habits, which is why those are so hard to change sometimes. But dopamine strengthens those connections. So how do we encourage that in ways that are going to be supportive to us? Positive emotion is a great example of a way to actually stimulate dopamine, so that when we're feeling positive and we're training our brain, those connections can be even more solid. So let me go ahead back here to the slides. I'm trying to keep an eye on time, and I have so much that I want to share with you guys. So just a simple example here of those forming connections. The way I like to think about it, to keep it easy, is creating roads. So we go from challenging to navigate gravel roads to cement roads that are easier in time, and then this automatic pilot mode. And really the goal in behavior change is, how do we start doing the things we want to do in automatic pilot, because it requires less energy of the brain, so we can conserve some of our mental energy and do those more automatically. And that really goes into the whole element of human behavior change and how challenging it is. But some of these cognitive fitness tactics are the same things that are going to help train us to do that, to change behavior in a positive way. So cognitive fitness, I mentioned that already, and here's the thing. There's a lot of great information out there about brain health and brain training. I did not need to write this book to get the information out there. What I did find, however, in doing my research, is that it can be very complicated. And so for a lot of people, in fact, I'm in a neuroleadership group, and we were having a conversation about a book, and people were really getting stuck on the science of it. And I believe the science is very critical, but I do also think sometimes we get stuck at that place. So I appreciate so much the people who are doing the science and communicating that, but I think we also need a simple way to get it out to the mass audience so that people can really start using this. So for me, as a former personal trainer, it just clicked with me very quickly, this idea of the brain being like a muscle, and that we need these different elements of fitness in order to stay sharp now and over time. So if you think about physical fitness, there are these three different elements that we need. We need strength, flexibility, and endurance. And when it comes to our brain, we're going to look at this in a similar way. How do we have mental strength? How do we have mental flexibility? And how do we have mental endurance? And what does that mean? Why is it important? Okay, but before we do that, I'm going to ask you to participate with me. I found out from a brain expert, John Medina, actually, who wrote a book called Brain Rules. It's fantastic if you haven't read it. That it only takes about 10 minutes of listening to a presentation for people's brains to go on vacation, basically. So